Welcome back to Dad's Planning Politics. We are so many episodes in, so many years into this podcast that I can't even recall. Do you recall what number episode this is that we've reached?
I don't recall. You uploaded
I don't
last
recall.
week, so I'll look this week.
I should recall. I'm assuming that it's around number 50-ish. I'm sure you guys know, so please have a little laugh at this, have a little chuckle, think to yourselves, God, these people, are they professional podcasters or not? Because I don't know. Do you know?
I think we're reasonably professional.
We're reasonably professional. This is true. Yeah, so welcome back. Today we have another incredibly heavy, complex episode, I would say, prepared for you, as is the state of current affairs in the world right now.
Yes.
And so we're going to start with talking about Iran and the recent updates that have been happening in Iran and everything that means for the region and for the world. We're going to talk about Lebanon and, therefore the war that has now erupted and moved into Lebanon as a result of the Iran-US war. And then we are going to move into Australian politics and talk about the South Australian elections and what the huge rise in One Nation votes and polling means for the rest of Australia and our elections going into the future. So,
exciting stuff to cover, Freddie.
Exciting, interesting, exciting, upsetting too, but you can't say that it's not exciting. I agree.
That's true.
Do you want to start with Iran?
Let's start with Iran. So this is the US and Israel's attack and war with Iran. It seems like initial military went rather successfully, the bombings, etc. But now Iran has closed the straits, which 20% of the world's oil goes through. They've also attacked a number of oil tankers, etc. And they've done it with really cheap equipment like gunboats laden with explosives and their cheap drones that have been well used by Russia in Ukraine against multi-billion-dollar oil tankers, etc., etc. So there's now a huge oil crisis in the world, the likes of which we haven't seen since the 70s, and people contend that it's the worst ever. Oil prices are going through the roof, and I really don't think Trump really knows what to do now. They've sort of unleashed the terrible things of war, and how do they put the genie back in the bottle?
Yeah, I mean, you would even say they called his bluff, yeah? Iran did in this situation because, as we all know, Trump, made a few provocative statements. Do you want to go into this?
Yes, well, Trump just a day or so ago said that, they were in negotiations with Iran to end the war, and that was going along well. And then the Iran leadership said that's fake news. That's not true. That wasn't happening. So I think it's probably the first time anyone's accused Trump of fake news, right? Putting his normal claim.
I don't know if it's the first time anyone's
but
accused him of fake news.
He's always saying other stuff is fake news, and now someone's turned it around back on him.
Definitely.
And for me, he's just using this to grow wealthier because he's just manipulating the stock market with his Truth Social posts. So oil collapsed after one of his Truth Social posts, the price of it, I should say, 20% down. I mean, this is radical stuff, right? And people are making a lot of money on this arbitrage.
Definitely. And I would say as the business professional, that's the kind of side of this that you bring to our podcast. You would say that this is all really just a business adventure when it comes down to it. And I'm losing faith in if he cares about anyone in America besides his business interests.
Well, I don't think he does. And I think the other interesting thing is Israel and US did this unilaterally, and then Trump is saying, he wants NATO to join, he wants Australia to join, Japan, etc., etc. And generally the response has been super lukewarm. I think Japan sort of agreed to do something. But, this is, again, he reaps what he sows, right? Does this independently, then expects people to come and help. And I saw a discussion with Mark Rutte the other day, the head of NATO, where someone suggests they should say to Trump, okay, we'll come and assist if you do this for Ukraine.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really smart response.
Yeah, definitely. I know, because in the state of things, it's like, what choice do we really have? So we may as well get some benefits out of a awful situation. But it's definitely interesting, I think, with the whole fake news thing and not being sure whether he really has been engaging in diplomacy with Iran or not. Traditionally, when we think of Iran, we wouldn't necessarily trust them. But I think based on the fact that in recent years, there has been many a time that Trump has said he's engaging in conversations and talks with different powers, even with Gavin Newsom as of last year, to do with the fires that were happening in California. And then it has come out that this was not the case and that he in no means was trying any form of diplomatic negotiations. So I don't think he considers that a path he wants to take ever. I don't think that's ever in his best interest. I think that he probably likes the situation that he's in, regardless of him digging himself into a hole.
Oh yeah, he likes the chaos of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a hole that he has managed and he has orchestrated.
The really interesting thing, I think, is the differing motivations of Israel and the US, right? So Israel recently bombed the gas facility in Iran. Iran responded in retaliation of that to bomb the gas facility in Qatar. And this has serious implications on natural gas around the world. In the Qatar case, for example, 2 of their major plants were destroyed as part of this. It's going to take them 3 years to rebuild those factories and plants. So just think about the impact of that. So roughly 20% of Qatar's gas exports are going to be reduced by 20%. Therefore, that increases the gas price. It destroys part of the revenue of Qatar. And likewise, all these Middle East states like the UAE, they've built their success on stability and safety of living there as an expat and being a travel hub, a safe travel hub. All
And being
of that
very
is
wealthy.
very wealthy.
Incredibly
All of
wealthy.
that is now under threat.
Yeah,
All
and I
of
mean,
it.
I think we talked about that a little bit in the last episode as well, but I think that something I want to bring into this episode, which I think that people have been neglecting a lot when they talk about this war and when they talk about the impacts. You know, some people are hesitant to talk about the civilians caught in the crossfire. Some people are hesitant to talk about, you know, who started this war. But I think that something, if we really look at the facts, that is an output of this war is the incredible amounts of environmental harm that it is causing. So since the war has begun, there has been 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide put into the atmosphere just from this war itself. Because we often think about war, we think about bombs, we think about the military. I don't think we directly think, how is this going to affect the environment? And in a world where only a few years ago we were having climate change strikes every Friday, people were rising up. It felt like there was a swell towards helping climate change and making a real difference. Now we're in a position where war is doing the exact opposite of that, and we need to start making that correlation a lot more and questioning why we're allowing not just war to happen, but why the US and Israel have been targeting gas plants. Why have they been targeting like oil plants, petrol stations? Because these stations have been exploded. And also, like, on the other side, if everything Iran has been doing, obviously, with their bombs and etc., but I'm talking specifically about these natural disasters, which have now caused things like acid rain in Iran. Over 10 million people in the Iranian population have complained of having breathing issues and respiratory issues since all of this has begun.
It truly is eco-terrorism, and you see, this is the difference in motivations between Israel and the US. I think Israel just wants to degrade Iran to just a terrible state, and they're willing to risk the whole Middle East. Now, the challenge with that is it could destroy the global economy. This could be worse than COVID, right, in terms of the global economy, because if they attack the power stations of Iran, Iran will attack not only power stations in the Gulf, but, for example, the desalination plants in Dubai and Saudi. And without that, you can't live, right? I mean, this is really critical stuff. To your point about environmental stuff, again, I think the problem is, Freddie, it's Maslow's hierarchy. When the world is at war and people can't afford petrol to get to work and stuff, all that goes out the window because they're just thinking about day-to-day life.
And I understand that, but I think the main point is that this war didn't just happen. It didn't just happen out of thin air. It was a choice. And it was a choice by a few people in power, and they chose to do this. And they knew the environmental consequences. And talking about the desalination plants as well, a lot of them are located along the Strait of Hormuz and around there, right? What is happening now, you guys have seen the fact that there have been all these oil tankers traveling through the strait being attacked. What happens when these oil tankers are attacked and the oil leaks everywhere? So you're basically taking, like, you're making these desalination plants useless because you can't desalinate oil contaminated water.
Yeah, you're right.
That's not possible. That's not what they're built to do. So you're really taking water away from these people. You're getting to the point where you could be trying to starve everyone in these countries. That's what it feels like.
I've got to think the Saudis and the Qataris, etc., are in negotiation with Iran outside of the US and Israel because the stakes are so high for them, and they've got incredible financial resources, etc., and they don't want their way of life destroyed. So I think it'll be fascinating to see what happens over coming days.
Definitely it will. And I think the far-reaching consequences of this war will be massive. I think that this will be affecting people for a very, very long time to go. Regardless of if the war ends tomorrow, there will be people, you know, being affected by the increased price of water. Water is also a commodity. And I think that we're so focused on gas and oil, you know, things that make men richer. Are we really focused on what keeps people alive? And that's water. And we're getting to the point where water is really at danger. So watch this space, I suppose, and see how it continues.
You wanted to cover Lebanon and Israel's activities there recently.
Yes, so moving on to Lebanon. Do you have anything to start with?
No, I mean, you know, Lebanon's been an ongoing issue between Israel and Lebanon for a long, long time. Hezbollah, which are funded and supported by Iran, are very active in the south of Lebanon, and of course Israel hates that because they want to see the elimination of the Israeli state. So in history, you know, Israel has invaded southern Lebanon and occupied it over time. There is some incursion of soldiers and some bombing of Lebanon at the same time, at this point in time. They'd done already a really good job of getting rid of Hezbollah. You know, you might remember that pages scenario where they blew up all the pages. So it destroyed much of the leadership of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. But again, they've been receiving missiles from southern Lebanon, so that's their excuse to invade again there. It astounds me that Israel has such military capacity to fight all these things on multiple fronts at once.
I mean, where do you think the money is coming from?
Astounds me. Yeah.
We all know that the money has been, you know, coming straight into Israel for a very long time from the US. They've been directly funding the military since the creation, essentially. But yeah, I think Lebanon is really a question, and I would say a turning point in what's been happening. Because, you know, as far as Gaza was concerned, that was a humanitarian emergency, still is. That is a genocide. But in terms of the Israeli point of view, they could argue that that is within Israeli territory. Lebanon is an entirely different thing. It's an entirely different beast. It's an entirely different state. That yes, there are some Hezbollah militants and parts of the terrorist group that live in Lebanon, yes. But then there's also other, you know, Iranian-supported militant groups across the region. So are we going to invade Yemen to get rid of the Houthis? Like, are we going to invade every country around there in order to eliminate groups that exist within them? Because I just don't think that's possible. Where is the line in the sand?
Well, hopefully Iran stops supporting many of these groups, right? That's the hope of this war.
Yeah.
That they'll be degraded as such, and financially they won't be able to, or they'll decide not to continue to support.
But then I would say, interestingly enough, surely you would attack all, you know, focus all your forces on attacking Iran. And
that's
cut the beast off at the head.
But I think what you're missing here is an election coming up in Israel, and Netanyahu is again very popular because of this war. And you know, part of these actions may well be to support his re-election.
Look, yeah, I think that all of this has been, yes. For a long time we've kind of known that a lot of Bibi's actions have been just to justify him staying in Parliament, you know, in order to have support from the far right members of the Parliament. He went further right and has continued this regime, I'm going to call it. So
I know, but the majority of the Israeli population is in favour of this war with Iran because Iran has threatened to destroy Israel. And, you know, if they had nuclear weapons, that could be the end of Israel. So I kind of get their concern.
It could be the end of Israel having nuclear weapons.
True.
As a country.
True.
I just think that at this time, I think we should be separating the leaders from the people.
No, I know, but the assumption there is, and this is an interesting argument, why do some countries should be allowed to have nuclear versus others? Those countries who have had nuclear weapons for the last 40 or so years have held them responsibly, so they've not used them irresponsibly. The fear is that anyone new getting them may use them irresponsibly. So that's always, it's an interesting discussion, right? Because Pakistan, for example, has nuclear weapons and hasn't used them, thankfully, but they're probably on the edge of responsibility as such.
I don't think anyone really wants to use nuclear weapons. I think everyone understands that that's essentially starting the end of the world. I think the US knows that too, otherwise they probably would have had cause to use them at some point or other. I think that that's the whole nature of nuclear weapons, is they've changed the face of war forever because they're so disastrous and they cause such destruction.
So we shouldn't worry about new countries getting them?
Of course, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
Devil's advocate, for God's sake, I have to deal with this shit. But of course we should worry about new countries getting in them, and ideally no country would have them. And we were working a great deal towards deproliferation, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, that there was an agreement between the US and Iran to reduce their use of nuclear energy and to have watchdogs look over Iranian facilities to ensure that they're not producing nuclear weapons. And this was part of a reduction on sanctions agreement with the US, and the US exited this agreement
when Trump
came into power. So I understand the whole thing, of course I do, of not getting countries to have nuclear weapons. I know we can't trust Iran, but if they had agreed to allow much greater transparency and there was a hope of them not going down that path, I find it very bizarre and very dangerous that the US would exit from such an agreement.
Well, this is far more costly for the US, and in fact it's weakened the US's standing in the Middle East dramatically, this war so far, so has some long-term implications there.
Definitely.
Shall we move on to Australia?
Yes.
So last weekend there was a significant state election in South Australia. Peter Malinauskas, the Premier, won in a landslide, I would say.
The Labor Premier.
Regarded as the most successful Premier in the country. Talk of, my goodness, couldn't he make a great Prime Minister if everyone wanted to move to national politics in the future? He's really, really very effective and very popular. And effective in a way that he doesn't make people feel stupid for voting for One Nation. He says, well, that's on us because we need to provide better services and do these things to address their issues. So I think it's really, really intelligent. The big news was that One Nation outpolled the Liberal Party with 21% of the vote or something versus the Liberal Party at 18%. So this is an earthquake in the right wing of politics. I think One Nation will end up with 1 or 2 seats, I was last hearing, in the lower house, and 3 senators in the upper house in South Australia.
And I think that changes the game, right? That's the main output of this. Whether they polled higher than the Liberals or not is very interesting for the future. But the fact that now they have seats in Parliament is a massive game changer, because they've never been considered a party that can play,
lead opposition party or
with the
party
top
of
dogs.
government.
Yeah, they've never been considered to have that much power or that much influence, but now they're really accumulating that power, and we'll see how the elections go. Even in Victoria, Pauline Hanson is apparently very confident that they're going to go well for One Nation.
There's Victoria, and then there's the Farrer by-election, which is Susan Lee's seat. So a big competition between Community Independent and, of course, the Liberal National Party and One Nation. Yeah.
Definitely. And I don't know about you, but I would say that this is less of a sign of One Nation's brilliance, more of a sign of the Liberal Party's absence and failure to represent their communities properly. One
Nation is a typical right-wing populist party. They complain about the high cost of living, not being able to get housing. It's all the immigrants' fault, etc. It's an easy thing to say. You stop immigration, suddenly everything's going to be great. And then being anti-carbon zero, net zero, they're their 2 key policies. And it'll be interesting if they do gain more power, what they do, because at the moment they can just complain about things. It's much easier to complain about things than get into government and have to fix them.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think it is a call out for the federal Labor government as well, because in this upcoming budget, Allegra Spender did a great job recently on tax policy, a tax white paper that she put together, better than I've seen from the Liberal or the Labor Party. And fundamentally, it talked about reducing the capital gains tax discount, making negative gearing more difficult, but keeping it all neutral by reducing tax rates to help life be a little easier for younger generations like you, Freddie, because the whole agreement in society is breaking down that the next generation should be able to have a good quality life. Whereas at the moment, everything's stacked to people like me, and your generation finds it much more difficult because housing's so expensive and the tax system favours those with more money, etc. So it's gonna be an interesting few months.
Definitely, it will be. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting change in Australian politics, one that we're seeing across the world. I was reading how Bob Hawke, when he was in power, even as the Liberal leader, he very strongly came out against One Nation and said that they should always be put at the bottom of the ballot list and they should always be put last in the preferential order. And, you know, as in the past few years, that rhetoric seems to have changed in a position where Liberal Party leaders will make agreements with One Nation in order to, you know, have better chances of getting a seat. Even Bob Hawke has somewhat gone back on this opinion that he had in the past. And it says something about Australian politics. We're allowing the radical, because that's what they are, the radical extremist right-wing fringe of Australian politics to get into the mainstream. And I think that it's time we started talking about this right-wing group as extremists and radicalists, because that's what they are. And I think that we, you know, reserve that language, you know, for when it comes to, you know, you talk about terrorist groups and you talk about them being radical, but I think that they are also very
fair,
radical.
but on the right wing, they would claim the Greens are radical as well.
Yeah.
Okay,
and I'm fine with
way
them
the
doing
left
that, but I think that we need to start calling them radical rather than just right-wing.
Well, again, these preferences, if the Liberal Party give preferences to One Nation, I think it's, in the current guise, it's the end of the Liberal Party, right? You know, and one of our listeners, one of our favourite listeners, Howard Digby, was chatting to me the other day about the fact that typically working class people in mining towns, etc., have voted Labor, and a lot of them are voting One Nation. So what's that about? These working class people who've typically supported unions and Labor are now voting One Nation.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Because they feel upset with their life and they don't feel like the two major parties are supporting them and what they want. And One Nation has tapped into that.
Yep, and this is exactly what happens when parties become too centrist, and especially when there's only one party that is getting the majority of the votes. It's what happens. You're not representing the people at the outer edges of the voting electorate. So people get angry and there's nowhere else to turn but to the radical parties on either side. So this is just what happens when the Liberal Party can't do its job, when the opposition party can't do its efficient job, and unfortunately that's what's happening. I don't know if it's going to change anytime soon, so it seems like the swing towards One Nation will continue, in my professional, I would almost say, opinion.
Well, I think it will continue for a while, but I contend that it will burn itself out at some point, unless they join up formally with the Liberal Party and become the party of the right, and some of their more radical views are reduced as a result of that.
I would almost be interested, though, in what they do about the Nationals. Would they get to a point where they would join up with the Nationals?
Could be.
Because I think that a lot of their policies are a lot more similar than the Liberals and One Nation, and I think that they could become very powerful if they did that.
No, you're right. It's a very valid point. And then maybe the remains of the Liberal Party join up with the Teals to make some sort of moderate right-wing party. So who knows? This is Australian politics today. All the coming months will reveal what happens.
It will, and please continue to tune in for all of our, diverse and personal opinions on the topic.
All right, thank you, Freddie. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks for listening.